The people of the Basque region on the western end of the Pyrenees are one of the most ancient in Europe. Their ancestry is over 7,000 years old, and some claim that they were there even before agriculture became the norm. In fact, their native language is unique in Europe. And while they've been subjugated by others, they've maintained a strong and proud sense of identity, and rightfully so. Prior to the Islamic conquest, the Basque region was within the sphere of influence of the Franks, and it wasn't until 718 that they were overrun by the Muslim forces of Al-Andalus. They became a vassal, but in time they established some degree of autonomy. When Charlemagne came through in 778, he attacked them and destroyed the city walls of their capital, Pamplona. But the Basque, who were fierce, fought back. They annihilated Charlemagne's rear guard at the pass of Roncesvalles and killed the famous knight Roland, inflicting, some say, Charlemagne's only major defeat. Now, for the next 50 years, the land would alternate back and forth between the interests of the Franks and the Muslims of the Emirate of Cordoba. However, that sense of Basque autonomy would only grow and eventually lead to rebellion. In 824, a Frankish army was sent to subdue the rebellious Basque and made it as far as the gates of Pamplona. But as they were making their way back, the Basque once again attacked them in the very same pass of Roncesvalles. The second battle of Roncesvalles went exactly like the first, but this time the Basque also had Muslim allies. The Frankish army was destroyed, and its generals were sent back to Cordoba as a present. And as such, the Basque chieftain who led the attack, Iñigo Arista, was elected as the king of Pamplona, and has since been recognized as the founder of the Kingdom of Pamplona. Now, the kingdom would need time to grow and would find itself being attacked and attacking all of her neighbors, both Christian and Muslim alike. However, her true fortune was intimately tied to the success of the Cordoban Emirate. Now, to give you an example, when the Emirate was weak, Pamplona would be expanding. In 907, the ruler, Sancho I, who 2 years earlier had declared himself king, sent his armies out and took the county of Aragon. But when the emirate was strong, that is, when Abd al-Rahman III came to power and made the emirate into a caliphate, Pamplona would be on the receiving end of pain. It was during Abd al-Rahman's Muez campaign that Basque land would be devastated. And as mentioned before, the city of Pamplona was sacked in 924. But this was just for starters. When Al-Mansur took power, the raids into the northeast would only intensify. It became almost like a hobby for the caliphate to sucker punch the kingdom over and over and over again. Now that said, one of the reasons that the Kingdom of Pamplona would in part survive was due to her astute use of political marriages. By the end of the 10th century, her royalty would be related to nearly all the major powers, including blood ties with the Caliphate itself. After all, Abd al-Rahman III's paternal grandmother was Oñeca Fortuñez, who was the daughter of the King of Pamplona. Now, I don't know about you, but a family reunion in this type of political environment I think would have been a very interesting affair. The Kingdom of Pamplona would eventually get her chance. If you recall, in the early 11th century, the Great Caliphate fell and fractured into the smaller Taifa states, which they promptly began to fight and kill one another, and this was the perfect opportunity. It was then that the Kingdom of Pamplona would once again be able to assert her authority. Sancho III, or as he'd be known as Sancho the Great, inherited the Kingdom of Pamplona in 1004, just as the Caliphate of Cordoba was about to be consumed, in some cases literally, by fire and internal revolt. The man was both a shrewd politician and a skilled military leader, and from what I've read, was quite dashing with the ladies. The ambitious policy of expansion that he would adopt would require him to use all of these abilities. To expand his eastern border, he would seize lands from the Franks north of the Pyrenees. And then south of the Pyrenees, his army would conquer large portions of the county of Aragon. On his western border, he astutely married the daughter of the Count of Castile, and under the pretense of being its protector, he became the de facto ruler of this county. And then, in 1034, after defeating a string of rivals, and it should be noted that most of them were Christian, he captured the city of Lyon. By the time of his death, the very next year in 1035, the Kingdom of Pamplona extended from the city of Lyon to the Pyrenees and onward to the borders of Catalonia, which is the easternmost portion of Spain. But from this point onwards, it would be a period of decline. Sancho III's lands would be divided, and over the next 200 years, the Kingdom of Pamplona, soon to be known as the Kingdom of Navarre, would be picked at by a host of aggressive neighbors. However, despite being reduced in size, her core would remain strong. Just ask anybody of Basque descent today. And remember this. Later, when the powerful Caliphate of North Africa, the Almohad, invaded, it was at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, which turned the tide against the Almohad, that it would be a king of Navarre, Sancho VII, or Sancho el Fuerte, the Strong, that would find, exploit, and breach the lines of the Muslim army and nearly execute the caliph. But this is still in the future of our narrative, and as just mentioned, in the aftermath of Sancho III, his lands were divided. But this division would give rise to two of the most powerful kingdoms of the Reconquista, Aragon and Castile. Now, like I've mentioned before, in the first 300 years, roughly 711 to 1031, the nature of the Reconquista was more about survival. And towards the end of this time, it eventually became more about consolidation of the Christian kingdoms, not so much about reconquering the south. But you gotta keep in mind that up until 1031, when the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba was officially abolished, the Christian kingdoms were still pretty much at the mercy of the Muslims in the south. The flow of tribute would come from the north and make its way directly into the treasury of the caliph. But when this mighty state fell, the situation was turned completely on its head. Catlas again puts this really well. Quote, "The political environment of post-Caliphal Al-Andalus was ruthlessly pragmatic, reflexively opportunistic, and highly atomized. Among the clans, families, and individuals that struggled to hold power, none had a coherent ideological or religious platform, and their internal politics were characterized by regular usurpations, betrayals, revolts, and intrafamilial violence." End quote. Well, this is Game of Thrones on steroids. It was like playing a game of Risk, except with 50 players. People would wake up one day and note that 3 Taifa states were wiped out in the night. In time, the bigger fish swallowed the smaller ones, and the taifas of the great cities like Seville, Zaragoza, Badajoz, Toledo, Granada became the big kids on the block. But this was all relative. The Christian kingdoms, in comparison now, were just as big, if not bigger. And this would seem like the perfect opportunity for reconquest, no? Not quite. O'Callaghan sums it up nicely. Quote, "The Christian states of Leon, Castile, Navarre, Aragon, and Catalonia, however, were as much rivals of one another as the kings of the taifas. Rather than present a united front in opposition to Islam, Christian rulers vied with one another in imposing tribute on the taifas and later contended over rights of conquest. When it suited their purpose, Christian princes did not hesitate to make alliances with Muslims. From time to time, individual knights, including the Cid, who was often hailed as the great hero of the Christian reconquest, entered the service of Muslim rulers and fought against their fellow Christians." End quote. The Reconquista was still not quite the united front that later chroniclers would have you believe, but it was changing. The Christian kingdoms of the north seemed for the most part more content in just reaping in the tribute, called parias, rather than reconquering the south. And why would they? I mean, why would you want to attack your cash cow? This was basically a new normal that was being established. where you had ruthless kings who were willing to play really dirty in order to succeed, and not just against the taifas, but also against their fellow Christians. The playing field had, after all, changed, and the rules for playing the game had only gotten more brutal. The mentality of the Reconquista and the Christian kings had firmly gone from survival to full exploitation.